All right, you clicked on the video because you liked what you saw in the thumbnail, so stick around after this quick little sequence and I'll show you exactly how I pulled off this lighting setup. Okay, so first thing you want to do when you arrive on set is figure out where are all the natural light sources coming from. And the reason why you want to do that is because you normally do not have control over those lights. So by figuring out where the natural light sources are coming from, you will know where you need to flag off lights or, if possible, turn off the lights. In this case, since I am in my driveway, I am able to turn off the front lights, so the lights that are usually turned on right here outside of the garage, as well as the porch lights. I also have a security camera that flashes whenever it detects motion, so I made sure to turn that off. That way there is no light pollution on our set. Okay, so the next step we want to do is figure out your camera angles. So before you set on any lights, you want to see what's the shot you're trying to achieve, and you want to find all the angles. There's no point in setting up lights if you don't know what angles you want to get. Okay, so normally you would have already figured out all your angles in the pre-production stage, but what's really important is to have done a proper location scout. Because, say for example, you show up to set not having done a proper location scout, and turns out that the sun or like a street lamppost is front lighting your subject, which is creating a very flat and unflattering image. You only have two options at this point. Number one, hopefully you have the gear, like a 4x4 flag, to flag off those natural light sources, or you're just gonna have to find a new location, which is not ideal. So if you're going to use that location and you do have those issues, then plan your angles based around the natural light sources that you cannot control. That way you'll still get a flattering image, but you don't have to be fighting against those natural light sources. So the idea of the shoot was I wanted to go for a more Bladerunner-esque, cyberpunk, Tokyo at night in the future kind of vibe. So a lot of the lightings that I'm going to be using are RGB light sources to pull off that pink and blue kind of neon-esque lighting style. And I also wanted this to be done in the rain to add more depth and just overall more atmosphere. So as you can see, I have my Amaran P60C right here. This is a LED panel by Aperture. Currently, I have it set at 60% with a hue of 310, and it's currently at 100% saturation. The next light I have here is the Amaran MC. This is just a very small light by Aperture. Currently, I have this set on a C-stand, but that's probably overkill. It's acting as a hair light. Over here, I have is a C-stand, and attached to it, I have clamped my garden hose. As you can see, this garden hose has one of those heads where you can adjust the kind of water pressure, if you will. So I have it set to something that replicates the rain, and yeah, I have it about, I don't know, 8 feet off the ground, and this would have been closer on set. I'll show you the behind the scenes footage of it in action. And the final light I have is the Ambitful A2. I made a review on it, check it out on my channel. But this is an RGB tube light with a DIY honeycomb grid. Janky as hell, but does the job to control where the light is pointing. This light was basically sitting in the back of the car, and this acted also as a backlight or a hair light. Okay, so for our first shot, here we have the P60C acting as our key light. It is lighting up Alex's left side of his face as well as the windshield. Now, what's important to know is where the P60C is placed. It is placed outside of the car and is also behind him. If I had the light coming from this direction, his whole face would be pink, and that would just create a very flat
image. But by having the light coming from behind him, it creates a lot more shadows, as you can see here, and kind of gradients from light to dark, rather than just being completely flat. So the more shadows we have, the more depth we have. Okay, the second light I have in this shot is the Aperture MC. It is right here behind him, and I think I showed it earlier in the video, sitting on the C-stand. But basically it is acting as a hair light, and that's what's making him pop from the background. Say for example that light wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to see Alex's outline because it would literally just be darkness there. The other thing is, without it, you wouldn't be able to see any of these droplets right here. And what's really important is to create as much depth and separation as possible. Obviously, I also didn't want the light to show up in the shot, so the way I framed this shot is that you wouldn't be able to see the Aperture MC in frame. Now for our final light we have is the Ambitful A2, and it is sitting in the back of the car, lighting Alex from that direction, and that's just lighting, you know, these spots right here. Now, the reason why I have this is because without it, Alex's right side of his face or his body would be completely pitch black, and you would not have any depth there whatsoever because he would just be a silhouette on that side. Now, it doesn't actually make sense to have that light coming from that direction if our only light source was the Aperture MC from behind. But I mean, you could argue like, oh, there's more neon blue signs on that side, right? So that works too. But if your motivational light source is the MC, like let's say there was a blue neon sign right behind Alex, you know, it doesn't look too far-fetched to say like, hey, like perhaps that neon sign is also, you know, lighting Alex in this direction ever so slightly, right? So yeah, it's not like perfect, but visually speaking, it kind of makes sense, right? And it's nice to have that contrast from blue to pink, right? Like just that color contrast is another way to add depth to the image. Okay, so for this second shot, not much has really changed in terms of where I place the lights, but I am shooting this in the side rear view mirrors. So I rolled down the passenger side window and I just shot into the side rear view mirror. Now, I did notice that the amount of light has dropped ever so slightly compared to directly shooting straight on. So I did end up boosting the brightness level of the P60C to compensate for that. And the way I expose for all this, now it's gonna be different for each scenario, but I have a monitor, which is actually what I'm using right now to see myself. But this monitor has false color, and I definitely recommend having a monitor with false color if your camera doesn't have false color, simply because that, in my opinion, is the best way to expose perfectly every single time. So I'm not gonna get into that, but if you want me to make a tutorial on that, let me know. But otherwise, false color is 100% the way to go when it comes to exposing, in my opinion. For this next shot, you'll actually notice that the P60C is in the shot right here. Now, that was intentional because you can't really make out what it is. And I could argue like, hey, it's just like a neon sign. So I didn't really care if it was in the shot. But if you really wanted to, you would probably do a better job at hiding it. Ideally, I would have actually had a practical neon light sign like on a stand right there where it's positioned, like, you know, like right here. So I'd actually have the P60C behind Alex's head. So that way the P60C makes the neon sign look like it's emitting all that pink light into the shot. But one thing I would have done slightly differently here, because I moved into the back seat of the car to get this shot, I ended up blocking a lot of the light that was coming from the Ambitful A2. So normally you would have had the blue light shining onto Alex's right side of his face, but unfortunately I didn't realize at the time that my physical body was literally blocking the light. So keep that in mind when you're moving onto the set, that you may actually interfere with the lights. Okay, so for this shot, I'm still sitting in the back of the car, so same mistake. You'll notice that his right side of his face is completely black because I am blocking all of the light coming from the Ambitful A2. But otherwise, in terms of lighting, nothing has really changed. The key light is still coming from Alex's left side, outside of the car. And yeah, like overall, it's just a very nice angle. Okay, so for this shot right here, I did notice that there was too much light spill coming from the Ambitful A2. So what I ended up doing is I actually taped to the roof of the car the 5-in-1 reflector, like the casing for it. Like I just took out the actual like circle reflector, and then I just like grabbed the black side, and then I just like taped it onto the ceiling of the car in order to block off some of the light that was coming onto his face. Because as you can see, like it's a little bit dark here, and it would have been a lot more brighter. Like same with the roof right here, like it was spilling everywhere. So in order to control it, I just using gaffer's tape, I just taped the case onto the ceiling of the car to minimize the amount of spill, and I think it looks much better that way. But in terms of the lighting setup, pretty much nothing has changed. And that's actually one thing I want to point out is you don't want to light the subject. Your goal is to light the environment. That way, when you are changing angles, you really don't have to change too much of the lighting setup every single time. Say for example, you're lighting to make one frame look good. Well, as soon as you change the angle ever so slightly, you're gonna have to reposition all the lights again. So light the environment, not the subject. Okay, so for this last shot, I actually broke the 180-degree rule, but whatever, rules are meant to be broken. So this was actually the only shot from that entire shoot that was actually planned beforehand. What I mean is, like, I had this vision of this angle down shot to kind of create that feeling that he's like a small person in a large city, right? So you know how by shooting downwards, you make the subject feel powerless and small, right? So ideally, if I had a bigger budget, like the camera would keep panning out in this shot, revealing the whole city. This was the only shot that ended up breaking the 180-degree rule because I didn't want to have the lights set up on the other side. I wanted the lights to be as close as possible to the car, lighting Alex's face. But for this setup, I actually moved the key light, because if I didn't move it and I left the P60C where it originally was here, lighting his face, his whole face would have been completely pink and flat and missing all that nice cinematic depth. So what I ended up doing was I moved it to basically, I believe, the front of the car, and I had it shine through this way, creating nice shadows here. Now for the MC that was backlighting him is now becoming more of a side light, if you will, rather than backlighting him. So that never really changed, but it still works. It creates nice color contrast. Now, if you're wondering how I was able to get these shots without getting my camera wet, well, that's just having the proper placement of the garden hose. So you can't really tell, but the way I positioned the garden hose, it actually stops spraying water right about here. So everything from this side is dry. There's not a single drop hitting that spot, but it still creates that illusion that, you know, it's raining all over the scene, even though it's actually stopping at the line. And same with this scene right here. The windshield's actually pulled down for this one. I'm not actually sitting in the car, because if I was sitting in the car, I would actually be holding the camera kind of like this, which is really awkward. So I'm actually outside of the car. And thankfully, the way I positioned the garden hose, it's not spraying over the car. It's spraying on the side that Alex is on and not on the side that I'm standing on. So I was able to just have the windshield down and then just shoot straight into the car to get this shot. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to touch base upon is the importance of sound design. So watch this little clip right here without the sound effects and just the music, and listen to how different the experience is like. Now listen to it with sound design. Pretty different, eh? So visuals are only half the experience, while sounds and music is the other half. So keep that in mind when you are in post-production editing your video, to have good sound designs to really sell the effect. If I didn't have the rain sound effects, it'd be kind of hard to believe that I'm actually shooting on a rainy day. So just by simply adding the sound effects, it completely immerses the audience in a whole nother level.
If you found this video helpful, let me know down below. Hopefully I will be doing more lighting tutorials in the future. So yeah, stay tuned for that, and catch y'all later. Peace.